this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to use the ProQ2. The FabFilter ProQ has been considered to be one of the best parametric equalizers to date for quite a long time now. And it's probably FabFilter's most famous contribution to the plugin world. So let's open it up. I'm going to try to use as much of it as I can towards the processing of a French house sort of disco groove. I need to take a sample that's quite terrible quality. It's got a lot of horrible noise, and we're going to try and apply some processing and try to get rid of as much crap as we can while still maintaining all of the good stuff. And that's really the name of the game when it comes to using surgical parametric EQs. So let's get started. Let me play you the subject at hand. Okay, so first things first, my goal here is to completely kill the bass. I want no bass. I want to totally destroy that terrible high-end hissing. That sibilance is totally, it's just not wanted. It's not welcome. It probably resulted from really bad recording of a vinyl record. And this kind of distortion is pretty common when you record vinyl that's being fed through very low quality preamps. Anyways, enough about the quality of the sound. Let's get started going through some of the features. So first and foremost, we would like to create a high-pass filter, or in other words, a low-cut filter. To create a point on your EQ, you can just double-click, and now we have a point. But this is a bell EQ. I mean, that's fine. We can drag it up and down. We can likewise move around these knobs. Gain would bring it up and down according to a decibel value. Frequency, it would move left to right, would move your point left to right along the x-axis. And the Q value would make your bell appear more or less, or it would give it a greater or lower slope, more shallow or more steep slope. So something from, if you want to do something more surgical, which is what we're going to try to do when it comes to the annoying sibilance at the top end, we're going to do something more surgical. So we're going to be using an EQ with pretty high Q values. This little gear over here, when you click it, it actually links the Q and the gain together to a certain degree. So when I reduce my gain, it actually results in a concurrent increase of the Q that's proportional. This kind of models some older console desks. This is how their parametric EQs tend to work. So if you want to model your EQ technique on something that sounds as if it came straight out of an analog desk, then enable these gears so you can link your Q and your gain together. Okay, so back to the project at hand. We wanted to low pass or high pass our entire sample. So what we're going to do is select low cut and bring it up to a level that's desirable. I want to get the bass guitar and the bass drums out of the signal, so that requires quite aggressive low cutting. I'm going to select this button over here and select a more steep slope. Probably something like 48 decibels per octave should be sufficient. Now I want to see exactly how aggressive that sibilance is in the very high end, this hissing. In order to do this, we're just going to hold our mouse over the spectrum, and that should be enough to give us a freeze frame of the entire spectrum. It's quite a useful feature of this EQ. It turns purple as soon as you bring your mouse over it, and then it'll start to gelatinize and it'll eventually turn into a freeze frame that will continue to grow as new frequencies appear. So this is pretty bad. This is exactly what we're dealing with. We need to crush this. Well, how do we do this? We can use a bell. Bell would do the trick. High shelf probably is not enough. High shelf is kind of like a high cut, but it's more subtle. Changing the gain just simply changes the intensity of the shelf, and changing the Q value would make the transition zone more steep at the point that we specify. These kinds of EQ shapes don't actually allow us to use this little analog gear, but that's of no concern to us currently. We would like to use a bell EQ, increase the Q of this EQ because we want to be quite surgical with this frequencies. I just added an extra point by accident. We want to be quite surgical here, so let's click this little headphone button to monitor precisely which range we're looking at. This allows you to basically isolate any point on your EQ, and according to the Q value that you set, it's going to specify the range of the monitoring that you're going to hear. So a wide Q would allow me to hear much more when I solo this. So that seems to be the culprit, 13K. Now, the problem is, I don't want to get rid of it in this kind of a manner when I start digging into the high end that a lot of other instruments actually need. Because then what starts to happen is the guitars, the trumpets, the saxophone, they start to lose their shimmer and they become muted. What I want to do is make a very surgical, precise removal of this one annoying frequency. And I want to leave as much as possible intact. So how can this be done? Well, first of all, let's make sure that this annoying hissing is present along the entire spectrum, the entire stereo spectrum, and not just the left or the right channel. Because if it's on the left or the right channel, then we can just cut it out from the channel it's present in, and then that would minimize the damage that we're doing to the entire signal. Let's have a look at the right channel. We are in the left-right mode, channel mode. So then we can click this R button and on any particular point, that is. And that particular point would then become a right channel point. And you can also click the headphone button and you're only going to hear the right channel. Clearly the sibilance is very present in the right channel. How about the left channel? Yeah, it seems to be present there as well. It's probably prudent then to just use a normal stereo EQ point and then just crush it. However, we need to be accurate about which slope we choose because bell EQs also have slopes. In fact, the slopes as they are manifested in a bell EQ are quite interesting. They make the bell more square. Let's use a 48 decibel per octave slope, and that gives us this kind of a trapezoid-like shape. And we're going to reduce the gain and try and get rid of that sibilance. Certainly goes a long way. Let's increase the Q to widen it out a bit. and make it a tiny bit less extreme. And experiment with other slopes as well. Maybe you'll find something that is more aggressive, but deals with the problem in a more direct way. Although dealing with or using very aggressive slopes also has its own drawbacks, namely that you tend to get resonance around these points where the actual bell begins. If you can deal with that, then by all means use these values. I try to use less is more when it comes to EQ. That's the philosophy that I try to follow. If you don't really need to use 96 decibel per octave reduction, then don't do it. Try 36. So notice how we managed to get rid of a lot of the sibilance without really harming the rest of the track. That's because we're using very surgical EQ and we're specifically attacking frequencies that are contributing nothing to the music and just ruining the music. That's why we can justify using these kinds of drastic measures. So let's compare what we've just done with the dry signal. Clearly there's a great difference, and the sound is much more pleasant. Finally, we can maybe benefit from a little bit of reinforcement in the middle. Again, all it takes is just a single click and you have a point generated. I want something more broad, so we're going to use a wider slope. And what you can do is change your analyzer to include both your pre-EQ and post-EQ signals, and you can compare them in real time. As you could have seen over there in the freeze frame, the collection of the hissing was a tiny bit offset from the bell EQ that I put down. So now if we freeze it again, I think we will find that it'll align quite closely. That's correct. We can increase the speed of the spectral graph. Likewise, we can increase the resolution for really high quality imaging. I don't find this particularly necessary at the moment. And you can use a cool feature called EQ match. When feeding a reference input, it'll actually analyze this input and then try and match its EQ profile. That's particularly useful if you're maybe doing a remix or you're trying to emulate some kind of a sound. It can be quite useful to match the EQ profile because it's actually very, very tricky to do by ear. So FabFilter Pro Q2 actually includes an option to do that automatically. Finally, one more thing to mention is the fact that we were looking at the left-right modes. You can also use MidSide, the MidSide channel mode, which lets you separate EQ points based on their presence in the mid or in the side components of the signal. I can talk, well, if you want to learn more about what mid and side components are and how they function in an audio signal, my video on the Pro G goes into great detail about what that is. So in this particular instance, I don't really find a use for it, but a good context under which you would use this is, for instance, making the high end brighter, a little bit brighter only in the stereo field, while keeping the mid-highs intact. That can give you this sense of width and space without actually using any kind of reverbs or stereo expanders or anything like that. It's just little tricks like that that can increase the quality slightly of certain sounds, and when they add up in a mix, it really makes a big difference. So before we wrap up here, I just wanted to make a few more corrections to this middle reinforcement. We can try a notch filter. That would give us the opposite. Not because I find it to be useful, but I just want to demonstrate what a notch filter does. We likewise could have used a notch filter instead of this bell filter, but the other drawback of the notch filter is that it reduces things all the way down to infinity. You can't actually change the gain on these notch filters. Like nice broad strokes. The broader the bell EQ, the less obvious it is, and the less resonance you get, because whenever you raise or lower or do anything with an equalizer, you're always changing the phase of the sound. You're always changing the resonance of those points on the EQ. So, less is more. It's never, although when you're using the Pro Q2, it's basically for free. There's very little cost associated with relatively minor adjustments in EQ. But anything more severe tends to have at least some kind of a cost by way of phase manipulation or other such artifacts. In fact, Pro Q2 has a nifty feature that allows to completely eliminate any sort of phase manipulation when you change your EQ profile. What's interesting is that it works the same way as, well, EQs in general work the same way as your Bose noise cancelling headphones. They listen to a sound, they estimate the phase of that sound, and then they simply generate their own phase that's opposite to it, thereby eliminating frequencies. Likewise, if you want to increase the volume of a certain frequency, you feed the same phase into it, amplifying it. Well, doing this would cause phase distortion, which can be a very bad side effect of EQ, especially if you're layering together certain instruments like snare drums, for instance. When you high pass one snare drum, you're going to radically change its phase characteristics. And that means that when you layer that new snare drum over top of another snare, you're going to completely lose, they're going to start phasing out with one another. And that's going to result in a totally unusable set of snares when layered together. To eliminate that phenomenon altogether, you have to click this button here and click linear phase instead of zero latency phase. Linear phase, which you can adjust the degree of, by the way, what linear phase allows is any change you make in the EQ, obviously to the degree that you specify, will preserve the phase of the signal. Now, this isn't for free. This is at the cost of very severe latency, actually. So this is really, especially at the higher settings, it's completely unrealistic to use the linear phase EQs during production. However, during your mixdown and while you're rendering, this is perfectly fine. just be aware of the fact that what linear phase does, what these algorithms do, because most of the time when there's very sort of sensitive EQ work being done and you're treating layers, you should be working in linear phase to avoid any phasing issues. Anyways, this was a video covering the FabFilter Pro Q2 parametric EQ. It's one of the crown jewels of the FabFilter family, and I hope you learned something about it, and I hope you can apply some of these techniques to your own productions. Let me just throw this into some context here, and we'll leave you. Thanks, and have a great day.